LTC Partners of Portsmouth, New Hampshire is proud to sponsor the efforts of the New Hampshire Brand Project and WSCA 106.1 FM. They're committed to both creating a great workplace culture and supporting the Seacoast community. Go LTC and good morning, Portsmouth. My name is Terry Traynor. I'm the host of the New Hampshire Brand Project. We are on every Friday morning at 8:30 a.m. We interview business owners and CEOs living in action. Business owners, CEOs, and people making a difference in New Hampshire. And so tune in to us every Friday morning on 106.1 FM, WSCA. We are Portsmouth's community radio station. And today we have a very special guest, a good friend of mine, Roberta C. Pevear. Good morning, Roberta.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great having you on the show. How are you doing today?
Great, just great.
So, for those people who don't know who you are, Roberta's an author, and I've been in politics and done quite a lot. So, give a brief introduction to yourself, Roberta.
I came originally from Bethel, Maine. I graduated from Gould Academy, and I now live at Riverwoods in Exeter. What has been taking my time up since my husband passed away, he was a supervisor at the Navy Yard for 37 years, and he had Alzheimer's for 20 years, and then I needed something to bring me back to life, and I co-authored a book about the Civil War.
Right, yeah. Can you explain a little bit about that? Because I know that story. It's really interesting how that book came about. Could you just give a little description of how you came about to creating that book?
Yes, my great-grandmother came from Bethel, Maine, as I did, and at 16 she went to Lowell, Massachusetts to work in the mills. And she met a man from Vermont who had moved there, and they had my grandmother and her brother, and he went off to the Civil War. And she had all these letters that were written from her husband, Henry Foster, and she was Eliza Bean, and her brother still from Maine, went into the 5th Maine, and he wrote letters, and there were about 200 letters. And when my mother went down to Lowell with her sister to clean out the estate of their uncle, my aunt was throwing everything in the wood stove. And my mother said, "What are you doing?" And my aunt said, "Nobody wants this old stuff." And my mother said, "I do." So what we had, we don't know what she threw in the stove, but we had about 200 letters, documents, all kinds of stuff. And that's what is in the book. The book is named Write Quick, War and a Woman's Life in Letters, 1830, and then to 1867. And it's just a fascinating story because it's all in writing, and that's what we won't have today with the military because they're all using electronic stuff.
Right.
So it's just amazing what we have left.
We've talked a lot about the book, me and you, and it's also interesting because it comes from a different perspective than usual. I mean, it talks about the granted we were fighting on home soil throughout the whole war, but there's a lot more. This story was more about the war at home, the war with the women working in the mills and stuff like that, and what was going on this end. Excuse me. Which is kind of an interesting angle that you don't normally see.
Right. What happened to her was there were 70% of those young girls who worked in the mills died of some form of lung disease, and she was one of them. Her husband was eventually killed at the age of 30, and she died 3 years later at the age of 32 and left my grandmother and her brother orphans. But the book tells a story about what happened to a woman during the war. We hear about the soldiers and we hear about the battles, but we don't hear about what happened to the women. And I'm trying to get it made into a documentary to be used in the schools to teach the children the history of the women in the war. Mm-hmm. And hopefully I will get this. And it's called Heartache, A Woman in the Civil War.
It's really It is an interesting story, and it was kind of strange how me and you had met. I think we met through a friend who had introduced us. But every time we've talked, I've learned more and more about you, and how much you helped your husband through his ending, through his last part of his life, which was that's a pretty amazing story within itself. But also explain a little bit more about where you came, how you end up from Bethel, Maine, into Exeter, New Hampshire, and your tale from there.
Well, I married Edward Pevear. He was from Hampton Falls. The Pevears were in Hampton Falls for 300 years, and now most of them have gone. They're cousins. But that's how come I ended up at the Seacoast. And I had been an executive secretary, they call us now. It was just a plain old secretary. And a paralegal for over 35 years. And after I retired from Sears here in Exeter, I went I went into the legislature. Mm-hmm. And I was in there 10 years. But what got me involved in that was the fact that they put a nuclear plant a mile from my house. And as I say, the Pevears had been there for 300 years. And Edward was really upset about it. So I went into the legislature, and I did a lot of good. I'm a Republican, mm-hmm. but I worked with many, many, many fine Democrats, and that's how we got things done. We didn't, once you got into the legislature, you were supposed to not have a label. Everyone was supposed to work for everyone. And it used to work, and I don't know what's happening now, but here we are. But
the issue is more important than the name back then, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. And I became civil defense director of Hampton Falls. These three selectmen encouraged me to do that. So for 10 years, I was civil defense director.
What's civil defense director? What's that entail?
Well, it was supposed to protect the people in case of disasters. And, of course, when they put the nuclear plant there, we were planning for disasters. The dictionary says it's something unexpected that happens.
Right.
And what's gotten me taken away from thinking about my book, I've become involved again in the Seabrook issue. And I have an article here back in 2012, was in the Union Leader, and it said that they have found degradation known as alkali silica reaction, ASR. And what it is that cement is deteriorating at the nuclear plant, if you can believe that. And it was first found, I think, in 2009, but it was first found at Seabrook in May of 2012. And the Seabrook operating license doesn't expire until 2030. But because they can do it, they have gone for a 20-year extension.
So make it 2050 then?
Yes. And the NRC, which is supposed to be there to protect the public, since 2009 has been saying, just because the cement is deteriorating doesn't mean the plant can't operate safely. And to me, that's an outrage. And so it's taking me away from my love of my life, the book and the movie, back into this subject again.
You hear deteriorating cement and you hear nuclear factory. It's like that doesn't really give you all that warm, comforting feeling that it's okay. It's just a nuclear power plant. So I don't know much about. I'd be honest to say I don't know really anything about nuclear power plants or how it works or anything along that line. So to me, to make any type of statement is a little ridiculous because I don't know squat, as the saying goes. So so how long has the plant been open for?
Its license expires in 2030. Mm-hmm.
But when did it open?
So that would be their 30 years.
Oh, okay. So okay. So you were in the legislation. Is it now? That's the reason. Was it the nuclear power plant? Was the reason why you got into the legislation, or?
Yes. My husband, as I say, worked at the Navy Yard, and people would say to him, "Why are you opposed to the plant?" He said, "Well, the nuclear submarines and all of that stuff is like a pea, and the power plants are like a mountain, and the pea is for the protection of the public, and the other is for personal profit for someone else."
Mm-hmm.
And the Hampton Seabrook estuary was one of the richest estuaries in the world, and we only have 12 miles of coast. And we plopped a nuclear plant right down there in the middle of it. And of course, the sea level apparently is rising, and it's sitting right there with the cement deteriorating. And every year, those within a 10-mile area get a calendar that tells you what to do in case of an accident. And that is the only information that the public has.
So what type of an effect would it be, and what type of radius would 10 miles be the radius you'd have to be away if something was to happen? Now, I don't know what would happen. I don't know any of this type of stuff. I don't know what the dangers would be or anything.
To begin with, I was told personally by the head of public service that if the towns wanted an evacuation plan, they could make it, and they could pay for it. And I said, well, I can't believe that. And so I introduced a bill for an evacuation plan. Well, the thing got just so ridiculous by the time they got through changing it. We were sort of swimming upstream. It started out, it was supposed to be 2 miles. And we got it up to 10, which included Newburyport and Portsmouth. And they only wanted just to include the little piece that was in the 10-mile area. And I said, well, the rest of the city and town are not going to sit there while a piece of the town is being evacuated. So they are included. And I think it's a long time since I worked on this, but I think it was 11 towns within the 10-mile area. And back early on, I attended a meeting at the Seabrook Firehouse, and the ecology woman was there with the NRC. It's the first time I saw her, never saw her again. So I stood up and said, how do nuclear plants work? And she said, well, nuclear plants leak radiation when they're running. That's how they're made. And if you live within 2 miles of a nuclear plant, you're radiated 24 hours a day. Then we have what we have to call releasing the power at night because of the pressure. So then you have a little bit more. If it's a clear night, it goes into the atmosphere. If it isn't, it stays over that same 2 miles. And then we have what we call oops, which are accidents. And I really thought there would be rioting in the streets because all those people had children. I don't have any. But not a peep. Not a peep. And the other thing that I find fascinating is the amount of money that we have here in New Hampshire on the seacoast. If you read your homeowner's policy, there are 2 things that are excluded: acts of God and nuclear plants. And when
That's
they
convenient.
had the accident over in Japan, our government told our people to get 50 miles away. But the most I could get was 10 miles around Seabrook for the evacuation. And if you take 50 miles, you've got Boston and Portland and Manchester and Concord and what have you.
Wow.
The whole thing is ridiculous. And it's all it is, as my husband would say, to boil water to make steam. That's all this is about. And yet we have all of this huge, mammoth potential for destroying the whole of our seacoast.
Wow, okay.
You're laughing.
No, I'm not laughing out of sheer kind of
Since the early 70s
shock.
when I got involved. And people have no idea what's sitting down there. I have a friend who called it a peanut butter factory. And it just, it boggles your mind. But that's taking me away from what I want to do. But I have gotten involved in it again.
So how did you get back involved in it then?
Well, a friend of mine owns a nursing home, and he's 2 miles out of the 10-mile area in Massachusetts. And he had a lady she was paralyzed, and she'd been with the nursing home for 5 years, and she was watching TV. And a nurse came and got him and said that she was in tears because she had heard that if in case of an accident at Seabrook, they were not to be evacuated. They were to be sheltered in place. And so he went to talk to her, and she was in tears. And so he checked with the NRC, and that's true. And what they would give them is potassium iodide. And he was told that he had to find a volunteer who would stay behind and give these pills to the people who couldn't be evacuated.
Wow.
It is just amazing. And where I live, there are hundreds of people who live here. We're in apartments, and then we move on to assisted living, and then into nursing homes. And I'm sure no nursing home, no hospital today has any plan at all for evacuation. And the governments aren't any better. And the interesting thing is, they do test the sirens, and the people in the offices do go through their routine, but there's never been any evacuation planning, any movement of people. And I was told back in the beginning, the reason we can't have an evacuation test is because people would be killed. But we are now told, people wouldn't panic. They would help each other. And the thing that is really laughable is when you have 200,000 people down on the beach in the summertime, they have to go by the plant to get away from it. And it just, the whole thing is really laughable.
So, working in legislation and stuff like that, so what would be just the process in general about getting a bill passed? What is the process if you want to push forward with anything, not only this topic, but anything else? Pardon my ignorance to this, I don't know much about the legislation, but what would be the process as a legislator?
Well, you have to come up with your idea, and they have legal people who work in the State House, and they were, at the time I was in there, they were excellent. They would help you put it together. Then you need to hopefully get co-sponsors. And I always had people from both sides of the aisle. And then you get everything together, and it has to go through the House, and it has to go through the Senate. And then if they don't agree on the wording, then you have a committee of conference. And eventually, after you work your way through public hearings, I was clerk of the committee. I think it was 8 years of the Environment and Agriculture Committee. And I was on that committee the whole 10 years. And you have your public hearings with people. you have to have the input of the public. So they would have hearings, and people would come in and testify. And then you, as the clerk, I was responsible for writing up the wording to be put in the record. And you have to have it in the record so many days before you bring it up to the floor to discuss. It's a long process, but it makes sure that the public has their input.
Mm.
This doing stuff in the middle of the night when nobody's around isn't the way it's supposed to be. And there was a gentleman called Colonel Benton, and he used to indoctrinate you when you were a new member of the House or Senate, and he used to tell you that you keep things simple. He said, "Remember KISS. Keep it simple, stupid." and it was. He always told everyone, "You're working together for the public. You're not supposed to be Democrat or Republican."
Mm. The label doesn't matter as much as the problem.
I don't know if they still do that even. But
now, how long has it been since you've been in legislation?
I was in from 79 to 88.
Mm-hmm.
And then my husband got worse, so I devoted myself to him.
Wow. So let's just finish off the topic a little more with, I actually do want to finish off the topic with your book. Now, your book has gotten some, yourself too, has gotten some notoriety across the country. Is that true?
Yes. The book is being published by the Bethel Historical Society, Bethel, Maine Historical Society. And they have I've given them all of the letters and the documents, and they have just built a new climate control building for all of this kind of stuff. So they have the whole record, and they have all of the rights to the money except for my co-author's royalty.
Mm-hmm.
I gave them mine in the beginning, and now they get everything because they're doing the publishing. And what I had hoped was, as I say, to get this documentary, some people, particularly women who have read it, thought it would make a full-length movie, but I don't, that wasn't what I was after.
Right. It just came from writing. My sister's an author as well, and I have quite a few friends who are authors, and they all say every time you write a book, everyone keeps asking you, "Oh, when's the movie going to come out, or when you're going to make a movie version of it?" And I asked one guy about that. I said, "Hey, why do people ask that?" He goes, "Well, typically the people who ask that are typically the people who don't want to read the book and prefer to just watch the movie because they don't have the patience to read the book." But you've gotten. Let me see. You're up in wasn't your photo like up in Times Square too at one point in time?
Yes. I'm just amazed at the different things that have happened to me. I have a website,
mm-hmm.
and I've gone around making historical societies and different organizations in the DAR. I'm a member of the DAR, and but what is interesting to me is those who have said they'd like to see it in a movie is when they finished reading the book, they wanted to know more about what happened to these people. They really get into it because she had such a struggle during the whole thing, and of course it's all right there. All the letters are printed in the book, and I was the one that sat down and typed them all up. And I had.
Wait, you typed up all 200 letters?
Yes.
Wow.
But there were two different appraisers who said the reason the letters were so valuable was because I typed them up. And the Historical Society has the originals and my typewritten copy.
Mm. It's so now. You mentioned the DAR, I think is what you said.
I belong to the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Oh, okay. All right. I was going to ask, what is that? But the Daughters of the American Revolution,
Yes,
that's sort of
I belong to the
self-explanatory.
Ranger chapter in Portsmouth, and I was their regent for 4 years, acting for 2 years and then regent. And now I belong to the Exeter chapter. And I do a lot, in addition to all this other stuff. I have always helped veterans and now homeless veterans. And there's a Liberty House in Manchester, New Hampshire, who takes 10 people at a time into the house, and they find them jobs and then move them out into apartments. And they've been doing that for 12 or 13 years. This is volunteer, and there are, I'm sorry to say, there are like 500 homeless veterans in the state of New Hampshire.
Wow, that many?
And the majority of them, like 300 in Manchester. And this organization has built a building storage, and any one of those can come in and have a shower, get clean clothes. They feed them. But the ones that they are helping find jobs, they're putting them back into the community. And it is just absolutely a fantastic thing to have going on. And Donald Trump got, when he was getting the money for veterans, he got $100,000 for them. And I'm hoping they're going to be able to have another building. I looked at the Odyssey House that used to be here in Hampton. It's sitting there empty, but there are no jobs. And so what they were looking at, I think, is Concord and Nashua to have another home. But they are just a wonderful organization, and different people help in different ways. There's a yarn shop here in Exeter called Charlotte's Web, and Pat Gates has sent out a message to like 120 people that she contacts all the time, and every one of them is making a hat for the veterans. She made several of them and different styles and took them up there, and Bill picked out the one that would best suit their needs. And so all these people are making hats, and then they're going to make scarves. And a friend of mine, Shirley Guston, and I belong to the American Legion. I'm a life member, and I have been a member for 44 years. And they did a article in May, in their May magazine about me. But Shirley has this socks for veterans because she has been told over the years, with tears in the eyes, a veteran would say the most valuable thing to me would have been a pair of clean white socks.
Wow.
Now that's sad. But she goes through the school system and everything and gets people to get socks for the veterans. And you think that doesn't amount to anything, but that's what they wanted the most. So.
Well, we're just about out of time today, Roberta. But I hope you had a good time on the show.
Well, I did. And one last thing. I have written a letter to Attorney General Maura Healey of Massachusetts. She's at 1 Ashburton Place in Boston, and asked if she would ask the NRC to hold a hearing of first responders to get their opinion of whether you could ever do an evacuation plan. And it's sponsored by the We the People, a gentleman by the name of Steve Comley in Rowley, Massachusetts. And I have already written to them, to Maura, and I'm encouraging the towns to do so. 2 towns in Massachusetts have already done it. And I just think we need to do something about not allowing this plant to get a extension of 20 years.
Well, let's keep that voice being heard. So thank you very much for being on the show, and I look forward to talking with you soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That was Roberta Pevear, author. Lady works in politics. A very interesting lady, and thank you, Roberta, for being on the show. My name is Terry Traynor. I'm the host of the New Hampshire Brand Project. We're on every Friday morning at 8:30 a.m. We interview business owners and CEOs and people making a difference in the New Hampshire area. Tune in every Friday at 8:30 a.m. on WSCA 106.1 FM. We are Portsmouth Community Radio Station. Take care, Portsmouth, and this is Terry Traynor signing off.